Hello, champion. Today's talk is all about control. That incredible vulnerability we have for letting other people control us, and even the desire that we have to let go to the responsibility we have to hold the complexity of life on our shoulders and just relinquish it to somebody else. If you're new here, my name is Nicolas, aka your shrink in Bansko. I'm a trauma-focused psychotherapist, and with my colleague René, we are on a journey to understand as deeply as we can trauma from a multidisciplinary and multicultural perspective. Today's guest, vulnerable sharing, will highlight both what it feels and it is like to fall into a cult, what it takes to come out of a cult and heal from the experience of a cult. And it will also highlight the connection between narcissism, particularly narcissism in leadership, and cult groups. It will also tell us how it is so easy to actually become part of a cult without knowing, and how this ultimately comes down to the way that we love, if whether it's loving an individual or loving a group in this particular case. Okay, let's get to it.
Hello, everyone, and on this episode of All About Trauma, we're joined by TammieSWillis, a powerful voice in cult recovery and trauma advocacy, with a background in clinical mental health counseling and decades in communication leadership. Tammie has led peer support groups, designed recovery courses, and created vital resources for survivors of coercion, high-demand groups, and the troubled teen industry. She brings a rare blend of professional skill and lived empathy, and we're honored to have her with us. Welcome, Tammie.
Thank you, René. It's great to be here.
Very happy to have you here. Really, we have been chatting for quite some time. You helped me out with one of my clients who had gone through an experience of a cult, as she found out later, and as we will find out with you, it's often later that we find out that we're falling to a cult. What I really appreciate about you is that you have this background experience in cult experience. If I understand well, you were born in a cult to begin with, so that's a very deep experience. And so you're a very special person to talk to, because not so many people make it out, if I understand well. And then, of course, I'm interested in these collective processes by which we control one another, and then have powerful influence on certain minds, to the extent that, as we will discover, we can almost minutely control the gestures of people and what they're going to feel and so on. So I'm really honored to have you here. Really, I can't even express it properly in words. So welcome.
Thank you.
And I love to start with your story. I don't know if this is a bit intimidating for you, if I asked you just for you to share your story, from beginning to now. I don't know how long is that going to take. I don't know how much you're willing to share, but anything I think you'll share will be so valuable for our audience and the viewers that I hear.
Okay. I'll be happy to do that. And I will invite you, if there are any questions or if there's something that needs to be clarified, please ask as I'm speaking. I was born into well, not really born in it, but from my earliest cognitive memory, my parents were members of an extreme Christian fundamentalist group here in the United States. The group basically prescribed and structured everything they did in life, from the way they dressed, the way they raised their children, how they spent their money, where they worked, what they believed regarding morals and ethics, death, the afterlife. Pretty much everything was controlled down to the very minute detail. So, I am the oldest of three. I have two younger sisters. Both of my younger sisters were born with varying degrees of cognitive and physical disability due to an inherited neurological condition. And neither of them were able to receive the treatment and help that they needed because of my parents' involvement in the group. So that had a huge impact on me as a child.
How older are you, Tammie, compared to these children?
This is also part of the fundamentalist group that we were in. Part of their ethos is to have as many children as possible. So there's a 5-year age gap between me and my middle sister, and a 13-month age gap between my middle sister and my youngest sister. But in between, and I think before I was born and in between my sisters being born, my mother had 9 miscarriages because they just kept trying to have more children. It was just really, really ingrained in them as part of the ethos of the group.
Wow. So you should be always pregnant as a woman, basically, almost.
Yes, essentially, yes. And so, because of my mother's inability to have as many children as they wanted, and the fact that she was constantly, unwell from having miscarriages, both physically and mentally, I spent a lot of time alone as a child. So there was a lot of neglect, just by a matter of course, because my mother couldn't get out of bed. And I took on the role of helper at a very, very early age as well.
Wow.
So then, if you want to get down into the belief systems of the group and the ways in which they controlled people, it was very fear-based, very coercive, very punitive, apocalyptic, racist, homophobic, graphic descriptions of the end of the world. We were indoctrinated to believe that the world was not a safe place. I lived in fear of things like strangers. We were told that we were different from everyone else in the world, that we needed to be separate from them. So I was terrified of strangers, but we were sent out into the world to knock on the doors of strangers to convert them to our belief system. So there was this huge cognitive dissonance always happening. I remember being 3, 4 years old and having insomnia, lying in bed at night, just terrified of dying or of hell or Satan or, just all of the things that were just drilled into us day after day.
I'm wondering right now how many messes or like church going rituals were they, and if you were basically, if your earliest cognitive memories are of these rituals in a way.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is just the proximity and the amount of time that we spent in the group and doing these group and things and engaging in the rituals. So we did not live communally, but we lived in an isolated way from society, and we were only meant to socialize with each other, except for if we're trying to convert someone. So we were in the community for services, probably about 5 hours every Sunday in the morning and the evening, 3 or 4 hours on Wednesdays, 2 hours on Thursdays, and then I spent every school day, Monday through Friday, in a very small fundamentalist school, where we also had church as part of our school service, and we also had a Bible class as part of our school every day. So I was really just kind of steeped in it all the time.
Wow.
So what that does really is it's a powerful form of indoctrination for children whose minds are still developing. And really, if it's really kind of the goal of most groups like this, cults and high demand religion, to be able to have that kind of total control over someone as a very young person, because the indoctrination is so much harder to escape if it's ingrained in you from such a young age. It actually changes your neural pathways.
Great, Tammie. Maybe if I can ask, even in this kind of community, were there certain privileges that were only for the leaders of this, maybe the followers, or that all the rest of you did not have? Like, for example, this community, were any of you allowed to interact with other people, but the leaders could do so, but you could not?
So yes, that's a good question, because most cults and high demand groups have sort of a natural hierarchy. in which the leaders enjoy many more privileges and usually much more wealth than the rest of the group. And since most of these groups are based on these power dynamics of either, you know, control or money or sex or all three, um, it's just obvious that the people at the very top are the ones who are seeking those things, and the people at the bottom are the ones who are providing them.
Maybe I just want to add, even as when you said the apocalyptic and end times, what are the kind of narratives that are about these end times? Because I have heard that there are certain communities that they tell the followers to do away with everything materialistic. The world is coming to an end. Jesus is coming. There's no need to be any materialistic. No need to go to school. Was that also kind of the teachings you had?
Yes. So the group believed that there was going to be a revelation at some point in which, the world would be over as we know it, and the people who were believers would be taken away, and then the world would descend into war and apocalypse. Um, so essentially what that does to you as a child is it puts you in this place of constant uncertainty because you're told that you don't know when this is going to happen, but it could happen at any time. So as a child, I was always in this state of uncertainty as to whether or not the world was going to end that day. In fact, I remember, if there was something fun that was supposed to happen, I would say, "Oh, I hope the rapture doesn't happen before this fun thing." So that's how deeply it gets ingrained into you. And I'll just point out that there is, you can see this kind of on a grand scale here in the US and maybe in other places in the world as well, in terms of the way that fundamentalists view things like climate change. So they're not so concerned about it because, as far as they're concerned, the world is going to end and they're not going to be here for whatever, so it doesn't matter if we destroy the planet.
I mean, what was joy and happiness for a child in that environment? I think children have this incredible ability to find joy and happiness, whatever the environment they're put in. What does a joyful little moment look like in your life back then?
So it's very hard to explain this, but um within this belief system, negative emotions are not really allowed because negative emotions indicate indicate that you're not a believer or that you're not believing strongly enough. So fear is not allowed, sadness is not allowed. Um, but in terms of joy or, being lighthearted or happy, also not really allowed. It's very prescribed to you how you can be happy, how you can be joyful. You are happy in the ways that you serve. You're happy in, the ways that you are connected to the community. So it's all your emotions are very much always being prescribed to you.
Mm. Do you have a memory of a playful moment in your childhood, or is it really dark? Is it really difficult to answer this question?
No, I think children are very resilient. And also, I didn't know that I was in a cultic group, so everything was normal to me as far as all of this. And the indoctrination was so strong. We even had songs about joy, and about how joy is found in God and in serving God. So I was an avid reader, and I was very, very fortunate because everything that we read was prescribed as well. We had a very small selection of things that we were allowed to read. We were not allowed to really be exposed to most things in the outside world. No movies, no cable television, no secular music, nothing. Um, but I was such a reader, and because my mom was ill when I was small and I was left on my own quite often, I could also watch television. So that was really a kind of a real joy for me in a way, because I got a glimpse into the outside world. I would watch these American television shows like Sesame Street and Mister Rogers' Neighborhood and things like that, and they were, and I think that is where I was able to see eventually that what was happening to me and the ways that I was being raised were not correct.
What of your friends and connections at a so-called school? What do we mean by school in that scenario? Is education obviously is not the goal? I don't know. I'm confused.
No, you're right. You're right. You're on the right track. So I wasn't taught real science. We were told that the Earth was 5,000 years old, that the dinosaurs did not exist, that carbon dating was a lie, and that fossils were not real. Anything that they could do to support this belief system. So I remember ripping pages out of textbooks if they had anything at all to do with evolution. Um, so no real science, nothing but white American history. And by the time I was probably 12, not really very much math for girls. The system is extremely patriarchal as well. So there were a lot of differences in the ways that girls and boys were raised. But going back to, we'll get to that, but going back to the educational piece, it's really just meant to be a method of indoctrination.
And what is the ideal um, cult girl grown up? Like what do they want you to become essentially?
They wanted women, girls, to be well spoken so that we could be ambassadors for our group, but only within very limited parameters. Generally, women and girls were at the very bottom of the totem rungs, and we were treated as second-class citizens. We were abused and punished often. Um, we were meant to be quiet and do as we were told, essentially.
Do we Can we allow ourselves to just simply think of this as um, you know, like a time machine leaping back 200 years ago and kind of, this is not a cult, this is just a group of people who decides to live like we used to live some hundreds of years ago, or there is something more.
Well, I suppose, you can make those comparisons, definitely, because my group is essentially what we're seeing in the US today with the radical kind of white Christian national movement. That is my group, and groups like it in the US were where that started. So that entire ethos has been brought forward from the time I was small and really kind of built upon so that it's become actually a political movement. So yes, we did live in a way that was very much old-fashioned. We had a lot of reverence for the founding fathers of the United States as part of our altered history. Um, and and essentially, aside from those things, asking how is this, not just a sort of historical reenactment group rather than a cult, but what we're getting down to is the ways in which they control people and the ways in which they manipulate people's reality and the ways in which they engage in thought reform.
Yes, I think one of the ways in which my comparison doesn't work is that 300 years ago, that kind of lifestyle was the norm. It was the the edge of evolution, if you like. It was what it was the normality of everybody's life, and so there was no need for such control, right? that you went in or out of any community, and that's what you found. You found a much more hierarchical, patriarchal system. You found illiteracy. You found women not going to school or university, let's say, right? Less education for women. You found women that were much more educated in the work of the household and being a mother and so on, right? So, but in and out of your family and your neighborhood, that's what you found. So I'm guessing that something needs to happen for that reality to be to the boundary of that reality to be maintained as the gap between that reality and the rest of the world increases, right? Something
Yeah.
needs to be added up. Uh,
Yes. Yeah, and that's the fear-based control and the abuse, the physical abuse and the emotional and spiritual abuse and sexual abuse. These groups are essentially just full of institutionalized abuses. It's just normalized within the group, and it becomes a situation where predators realize that this is an easy place for them to do what they do, so it's also full of predators, and the ethos of the group grooms predators, in fact, because of the way that they treat women and girls.
a couple of things. One is, is there a chance you could tell us why you use the word extreme fundamentalist Christian group? Like why did you use those words? And then the last question is, do you think your parents would have described themselves as cult members?
Okay, so I describe this group as an extreme Christian fundamentalist group because Christianity is so mainstreamed in the United States. So this needs to be differentiated because there are plenty of people in the US who are members of extreme Christian fundamentalist groups that do not consider themselves as part of a cult or even a high demand religion. And that's the problem. So that's why I use the term extreme Christian fundamentalism. Essentially, it's a cultic group. Some people will actually call it a cult. It just really depends on your perspective. If you look at the ways in which they seek to manipulate and control, it is a cult.
And so, what is it an umbrella term for many small groups that call themselves slightly different? What makes
Yeah.
them fundamentalist? What makes them extreme? Uh, are
Yes.
they going around with weapons, wanting to? I don't know, like what's going on. Or
Yeah.
maybe now in Europe we have a very different religious landscape, very different, you know. So it's kind of a little bit foreign to me.
Yeah. Okay. So, yes, this is an umbrella term because there are so many different sects of Christian fundamentalism. Some are more extreme than others, but all of them are cultic in some way. Um, yes, some of them do go around with weapons. Um, Extreme Christian fundamentalism and white Christian nationalism are very, very violent, groups, essentially. They're looking for I was told as a child that I would have to fight and die for my religion someday.
Wow.
So that's pretty extreme. And then to answer your question about my parents, no, they completely bought into this belief system. Completely.
And so how would they have described themselves? Believers, just as believers.
Mhm.
Right believers, like for a good
Yes.
reason. Mhm.
Yes, we were right and everyone else was wrong.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, René, also for giving the space to because it's so, in a way, it's so wow, it's so there is a kind of a magnet force pulling, uh very strongly into something, and it's at once it's a little scary, and at the other it's I want to know this, right? I guess you know what I'm talking about, Tammie. It's probably what you felt so many times, or what people that work with you have felt a lot. Okay, René, what have you got in your heart and mind?
For sure, I think what I really appreciate of what Tammie has explained is really is so much in line with what I also want to share about the cultic experience in Kenya, but I'll get to it later. And even the questions I have is similar to that, because what I'm curious is about is, even as a community, and even though women were the totem pole, was there a sense of duty to enforce the hierarchy, whereby, for example, if you're watching television or you're reading books and someone found you, there will be certain prestige in telling or reporting Tammie that Tammie is not following what we are about, and she should be punished. So was there a sense of duty that if you see Tammie, if you see any other girl going against the group, you should tell, and there's prestige that I'm the one who found Tammie and she should be realigned back to the group, or punished because I feel like I'm following the rules better than her.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. We were supposed to report anything that we saw that did not follow the rules and the belief system. And if we were found out to have seen someone doing something and we did not report, we would be in as much trouble as the person who had done the bad thing. So if you can imagine the level of hypervigilance that you live in under those circumstances every day, all the time, and just the fracturing of your ability to be in relation with other people and to build trusting relationships. Most of the relationships I had as a child were trauma bonds.
Mm.
Wow, in the real true sense in this case.
When you said most of your relationship were trauma bonds, did you notice that any other, we'll say, congregants or believers sacrificed certain relationships, even with family members who did not believe the truth, who are non-believers, who are living a life that was not, believed by the group? So did you notice that there are certain people in your fellowship who maybe didn't have the privilege to have their mother and father and yourself in it, but they had to cut off and they were the only one alone and you are their only family?
Yes, that is a big component of cults in general. And certainly within our group, we were meant to isolate from anyone who didn't believe in the same ways that we did, and that would include family. In fact, I even knew a few people who the woman in the relationship would come and be a part of the group with the children, and the husband or partner would not. And it was very, very looked down upon that she would still be with the partner who was not a part of the group. So it was explicit. I was very fortunate because my father was in the American Navy when I was growing up, and he was a very abusive person anyway. So I had kind of this complex trauma that was coming from my home situation as well as my cultic situation. But my father was away very often for sometimes 9 months at a time because of his involvement with the Navy. And so my mother was alone and she really was, needed support. So we were still very much in touch with her family, and they were not a part of the group. And so when I visited them, I also kind of had this glimpse of what normal life looked like, and my grandmother would buy me, normal modern clothing to wear, and I wasn't allowed to tell my father, of course, but it was just this kind of tiny slice of normalcy where I would get to watch television and, see movies and wear normal clothing and listen to music. But that was not the norm. Usually either everyone in the family and the extended family was a part of the group or they were not really in touch.
Well,
For many cults, and even probably the one I'm going to mention, is there an economic structure with it that if you live all together, whereby you get your foods, whereby you get your materials that sustain you on a daily life? Is there economic structure that comes with it? And for those who join in, do they also have to maybe even hand over their economic autonomy, whereby there's a certain contribution, or since this is your life and after this is just, the end of the world, you get to submit any probably future plans you had up with yourself and your resources?
This can kind of vary depending on the cultic system. Usually in communal cults, you're giving up everything and you're usually being labor trafficked. So, your money is going directly back to the leader. And it's another way of controlling you because you don't have anywhere to go or any means to escape if you don't have any money. So yes, that is a feature of cults in some form or another. Within my group, my parents were forced, essentially, if they wanted to remain in the group, to give 15% of their pre-tax income to the group, as was everyone. Um, and then in terms of non-material type things, they were meant to be volunteering their time. My mother worked for my school for very little money. Um, yeah, so it really is very dependent on the type of group that it is, but in some groups you will see where everything is turned over to the group, and in some groups you may work and get paid a very small amount. But usually it's a shared resources and a time requirement for volunteering.
The sort of vigilance that you were mentioning before reminded me of Eastern Berlin and the state of vigilance of the communist times in Eastern Berlin. And Eastern Berlin basically collapsed under that state of mutual hypervigilance because it had gotten to a point where the fabric of trust had completely disintegrated, and so therefore there is no way to go any way forward. And so in a way, these tactics of control implode onto themselves, right? They collapse onto themselves in many cases. I'm wondering, uh, do you have any insight or understanding as to how your parents walked into this? Because you and I, as therapists, I mean, know that there is intergenerational processes that extend far beyond our own little lives, right? These are processes that extend centuries within family systems, but they're certainly larger than one generation or one person. So have you understood at any level what led your parents to move in that direction? Why them?
I do want to clarify, I am not a therapist. I am in school and working on my master's in science now. I do work in counseling and have been working with cult survivors for about 4 years, but not a therapist yet.
Not official.
So then, no, not officially. So to answer your question, this is one of the main things that I think people don't really see in terms of cultic manipulation, and that is the ways in which they draw people into the group, and how they manage this is they're very, very good at seeing what people need and promising it to them. It's they don't usually deliver, but they promise you this thing that you want desperately. And so at the time that my parents joined the group, I was 3, and we were living in South Carolina in the US, and my parents were young. They were only 24 and 25 at the time. And so my father was, always away. My mother was basically a single parent, and she wasn't well. And the group had this outreach program for young military men. And it's a great way to recruit, and this is what cults do. They go to college campuses and they find ways to recruit young people in some way. They go to political groups and things like this because young people are more idealistic, right? And so in my father and mother's case, it was, hey, if you come to our group, we will help you with childcare and you'll have this instant family and you can come to our house for dinner and all of these things that my parents were really missing because they didn't have a support system where they were so far away from their own families. And that was it. That was all it took. We kind of got taken in by one family. They were the parents were old enough to be my parents' parents, so and they had 8 children, and their oldest children were just a little younger than my parents. So we were, invited into the family, had dinners with them, did family things with them, got invited to church, all of those things. They babysat for me so my mom could have some time to herself, all of that.
They offered community and they offered practical support, basically. And we know initially, loneliness is a very, very bad, dark place to be. To be a lonely mother is very, very hard if you're disconnected. So if you offer some connection tissue or opportunities, then it's so easy to fall for it. Yes, yes. And initially, I imagine initially it's just the family saying we're going to help you, and they do help. I imagine with a lot of things. Do you remember this passage, this transition into this new life, and could you describe it?
So, you're talking about the memories of a very small child, but I do remember, which is, strange because a lot of people say that you really don't have cognitive memory at 3 years old, but I do have these memories. I think it's just because it was such a striking thing to happen. But I remember the family, and I remember, going to their house, and there are pictures of us all there, and just being welcomed into this family system that was so different than our little family system, even though my parents were not, in the cult at that time. And it just felt very warm and it felt, very loving. And uh I don't remember it getting scary until maybe, a little bit until I was school age. I'd say maybe like 4 or 5 years old when it really got to be very frightening to me. And that was because we were sitting in these services and the speaker would just be, spouting these really awful, terrible, scary things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just taking it all in and really tying in how this movement and fear is such an important takes an important role in controlling the whole community. So, and getting to understand how fear helps to push this kind of narrative. So I'll be curious to understand, with all these strategies that they were using, what was possibly the success rate of conversion? How was there one individual who was super charismatic, who always found a way to get in new followers, whether it's in the army, whether it's in any different space? Was there, as did all pivot to one particular very charismatic leader who always, in case people felt that they don't want to disconnect, this particular individual had the ability to draw everyone in together?
So usually within a cultic system, there is one charismatic leader at the top who is driving all of the behavior or, creating the ethos of the group. And that was certainly true for us. However, the way that the hierarchy was structured, the leader had, sort of lieutenants under him, all men, and then they would also be teaching the young boys how to prophesy in the same way. I mean, as young as 8, 9 years old. So, in addition to the family outreach that we experienced, there was also, and maybe you've seen this. I don't know if it happens in Europe in the way that and in Africa the way that it does here, but they will have street preachers, just these real extremist preachers who are standing on the street corner and, with a microphone or a megaphone and just, saying whatever it is that they want to say. And it's usually about, the end of the world, or, people that are going to hell for the sins that they're committing, especially, they're very homophobic. So usually that's part of it. Um, and so there are just so many different ways for them to try and bring people in, and they teach you this way of being charismatic so that you can also have the power to kind of draw people in that way. And it has so much to do with the language that is used, and persuasion is such a finely tuned thing, and sometimes you can't put your finger on exactly what it is about someone that is persuasive, but they teach you these ways of being and the ways of speaking that will allow you to be more effective.
Other way, was there also a personified enemy? Was the enemy a certain personified individual, whether it's the government is the ultimate evil? Was there a picture or a personified image of the devil that was the complete, maybe say, epitome of evil, what you're against?
Yes. So, again, there's a hierarchy here, but the evil is Satan, and demons. They're the ultimate evil. They are the ones that will tell you lies and lead you astray. So essentially, this is a personification of anyone who doesn't believe in the same way that you do. So it filters down, and so every other religious group, including other Christian groups, were demonized as non-believers, and they were all going to hell. Individual people who don't believe in the same things that you do are not, they're to be feared. As I said, I was terrified of strangers, terrified, because I didn't know what they would do to me, because I was told that they were scary. So it's really this us them mentality, and this happens in all cultic groups. But yes, in our case, there were so many things, that we were meant to see as bad and different and scary. And it was, at the time, this was during the Cold War, so communism was one big thing. We were told that everyone else was against us, and that eventually there would be a battle that we would have to fight, a physical battle that we would be fighting for our belief systems.
These people operate from a place of so-called freedom, but then because they see everybody else as being a slave of the devil, and them the only ones that have the power to be free, in a sense, be free and good, then they need to impose this freedom on everybody else. And so from their point of view, it's just they're just evangelizing. They're just making the world a better place. But from the point of view of me and René and you, this is an attack on our true freedoms, because of course we all have now different worldviews which we don't impose on other people, and we are happy to stay with, right? I guess.
Yes, yes. And if it was just a matter of them evangelizing, people do that all the time for various things, right? But this is so much more extreme. This is really about imposing those beliefs at a very real level.
If you could actually allow me to maybe just share an experience in Kenya that is so similar to what Tammie had shared. So there was this cult that came into the media limelight in the country, and maybe to give a backstory, it started by one individual, like I mentioned, one charismatic leader. He started off as a taxi driver in the coastal city of Kenya called Malindi. And around the year 2003, he felt the calling to become a pastor. And now his message was apocalyptic. It also borrows of the end times and all that. So he called it the Good News International Ministries. And his name was Paul Mackenzie, actually, it's even in the news. So Paul started this church, and he felt that he was called by God to lead believers to prepare for the end times and the second coming of Christ. So as he started to preach in that small coastal city, it began to grow gradually by families, ideally. And these were mainly like lower class families who also were drawn to him by the hope and the belief that, there's a second coming of Christ. And also he said that everything Western was evil, whether the Western religion, the education system, the healthcare, all of it were agents of the devil, Satan. So he really believed that the second coming of Christ was something that is pure, that has to happen within the context of his culture in some extent, and it had to deal with the separation from everything Western. So all these families that joined him, they didn't go to school, they didn't get any health care, whether their mothers or anyone else. And as it began to grow, there were some individuals, actually one particular individual who got to join and gave a rather large cash injection because like the believing of the second coming of Christ, they said, you do everything, you sell all your earthly assets. So this person sold all their earthly assets and he got this amount of around $200,000 and gave this man. So this $200,000, this Paul got to start a TV broadcasting channel to now push his message even more. So now he had a TV channel. Now he was reaching thousands. And now the congregation even grew more. So now everyone across the country were coming to this coastal town to be part of this community that believe in the second coming of Christ. Now, when they get into this particular town, one thing they had to do and a practice and a ritual they had was fasting. They believed that when you fast yourself and you fast all the way to actually starvation and passing away, you go as a martyr. You grow as a noble saint. That's how you get to go and meet Jesus. So this actually happened several times. And by the time, like maybe if you can fast forward a bit, by the time they got to find out, almost 400 people had starved voluntarily, believing that they are going to meet the second coming of Christ. However, he himself was exempt from that because he was the leader and he had the message, so he could eat normally. Everyone else had to have that practice in the ritual of starvation. You have to fast and purify yourself and cut off all earthly possessions and habits in order to be pure enough to meet Christ. And so when this situation and this community began to grow, the other surrounding community were wondering, how come we are realizing in a certain area there's so many starved people and some of these individuals aren't local to here, they're traveling from far to here, wondering who are these people. So it goes to the news attention and even the police were involved. Now, the curious thing about when the police were involved, none of the followers were able to testify against it. So he was set free for lack of evidence. There was no witness. No one was able to say. So it's only the surrounding community that are wondering, this is strange, but we can't put a finger of what he's doing. And the people inside refused to tell on him. So this happened about maybe 3 years up until it got to a point that I think one particular police force goes to infiltrate the whole the area they were living in, and they found out that these so many several grave sites. And they're wondering, why are there so many graves here? That's when they got to realize the whole operation of him telling people to fast themselves, purify themselves, and starve to death in order to be worthy to meet Jesus and die as a saint. So when all this happened, it became a very, very big news item. When he was arrested and some of the followers were arrested, they seemed unremorseful. Some of the followers also, some even came to the courthouse and trying to defend him, saying he knows the truth. Leave him alone. He has nothing to, he didn't force us to do anything. He didn't violently take us. We really believe he has the truth and want to follow him. So it has been a case that is going on ever since 2023. And it's a very interesting story. And I think it really ties into the post-apocalyptic message that, all this will pass away. What's the worth of connecting to these systems of Western living styles, whether going to school, whether going to take in medicine? That is all agents of the devil. We should really believe in ourselves and look within and sacrifice ourselves, and there's reward in that sacrifice. So unfortunately, around 400 people, including children, got to believe it, and they lost their lives. So I don't know, how does this maybe message relate to you?
Oh, it's a horrific story. I remember this story from the news, and unfortunately, it's not a unique story. This has happened in so many cultic groups. If you look at, well, of course, Jonestown in the 70s is an example of this. But there have been so many others. The other big one that most people know is Heaven's Gate, in which almost all of the members were successful in committing suicide including the leader, because of what the leader had told them. But what it speaks to is this sort of, unfortunately, really elegant system of thought control, of just all of the pieces that fall into place for this leader to be able to really control people to that extent. And it's very, very hard to see when you're in it. You mentioned the people who are unremorseful and the people who, think that he's a good person and that he has their best interests. It's because they really believe that, because they have abandoned their ability to think critically. And that is the ultimate control.
What do you think happens to this Paul when he goes from being a taxi driver to a preacher, a pastor? What in your experience, Tammie, this is a story I've heard so many times since I was a child, actually, in a way, of people going through this. And now I'm in the mental health field. I don't know that I can very well explain it. What is your understanding of the beginning of these things?
Well, I would say in almost all cases, these are narcissists to some degree or another. And as we know, with narcissists, the ones who seek to control really, that is their supply. That is how they get to their life force, is through this ability to control other people. And so once they get a small taste of it, even a taxi driver who is a narcissist, if he's able to begin to get people to listen to him, is just the start of something. And they refine their techniques, with this, you see an evolution in these groups from the way that they start to what they ultimately become. And that's where you can begin to see how it is done, what they start with and what they end with are very, very different.
And of course, there is a kind of a systemic kind of interaction there, because it's almost as if people from all over the country of Kenya were waiting for that, for somebody to invite them into this us versus them kind of place, no? There is a vulnerability that is latent, it seems to me, in the collective, here and there.
Yes, that is true, and the interesting thing is that, for the groups that are based in religion, as the one that you're talking about, Renee, I think that it is very dependent on geography in terms of how it begins and how they begin to draw members in, because the apocalyptic religious cults especially are this very strange mix of offering people hope, as you say, Renee, while at the same time, having this message of utter destruction. So, it's this dialectic that we see, and it's so hard to examine it and understand it from the outside. But when you're in it, it's so powerful and so all-consuming that it just takes over.
It's almost as if they managed to tap into this life drive that we have and this constant fear of death that we have. It's really that fine wound of us. It's on so many levels trying to deny the fact that we are mortal.
That's interesting. I never really thought about it that way. I mean, so much of it is about, don't worry about what's happening to you in this life. You will suffer, it will be hard, you may have to fight, you may have to die, but you'll be rewarded with this,
Yeah.
beautiful afterlife.
Yes. Yes. And some of these messages have been in the church at large. I mean, people people that are celebrated in the church environment, the Christian church environment, like saints, have gone through many times these kind of rituals, like going into a desert and not drinking and eating for until you're almost dying. So and some of these saints have written philosophical essays and have sort of advanced the discourse of the church, and sometimes even brought it forward in terms of modernizing it, right? I'm thinking of St. Augustine and um, so at some level, this journey of going deep into a belief can have also very positive repercussions for someone. But this is different, right? This is different. For 400 people starving themselves to death is it's really so hard to understand. But it's the mind taking over the body, isn't it?
Yes, yes. It's thought reform. It's just this ability to really, first you have to suspend your belief system, and second, you have to give up your ability to think critically and fall into this very black and white worldview. Uh, but once you're there, you can, a leader can pretty much tell you anything, and you'll believe it or do it. And it's just that's just the most powerful tool and that is used for evil.
uh, at any point in time during our life, I know that we are liable to fall into regressions, right? Like we can have massive, let's say, losses, or let's say I'm the CEO of a company, and uh, it represents all that I think I am and my life, my economies, and so on, and it goes bankrupt, and I can go through a massive regressive episode and become at 2-3 years old for a certain period of time. And it feels to me that this is also another kind of potential that is stepped into. And the reason why we regress, by the way, is that evolutionary speaking, the kind of psychological states that we have gone through to become the humans that we have become. And I mean, through the long process of evolution, starting from, before the Neanderthals and like the very early hominids, right? And who knows, maybe even beyond that. Um, this evolution means that we have gone through stages and leaps, right? Of let's say intelligence or cognitive complexity, um, cognitive emotional complexity. But the foundation of life on this earth remains the bacteria, remains the lower stages of life, right? And so in us, we have the same mechanism that a computer has, that when you drop a computer, for example, or when a virus enters the computer is able to go back into safe mode. And it's a much lower state of processing, but it's safe. And essentially our brain can do that. It can shut down and go to safe mode, and become, and we see this in many survival situations when people get trapped, in the snow or in an environment, they regress to the most basic physiological functions, and they survive. And so we have this potential to regress, and we can do it to different degrees. So people that moved perhaps to this cult on the East Coast were having issues in their life that made this latent potentiality of regression uh, much more accessible. Let's say, right? I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but one thing that I wanted to go back to, Tammie, is this feeling that when we started this recording, the first few things that you were sharing really made me feel really heavy and dark. But it felt also appropriate because that was the beginning of your experience. It's where you dive into this dark place. But now, as we have talked a little bit more, I feel we are kind of, we've passed, you're 5 or 6, let's say, in the story, and you've told us that you're a big reader. And so there is a little, what would you say, spark of hope for you. And of course, we are reassured that things turned out well for you. And so that there is a continuation of that spark, right? That there is a thread that takes you to a new place. And so can we follow that thread? And just continue in this story and see how did it happen that you could develop this critical thinking? What, if that is the biggest element that got you out of the cult eventually.
Okay, so I think that because I really do think it was reading. I really do, because no one was paying attention to what I read, and I had a library card to the public library, which, our library in our school was very curated, so, there wasn't much there. But I had a library card for our public library, and I would walk there, several times a week, and nobody was paying attention to the books I was reading. So that was probably one of the big things.
Did you
Um,
do something wrong when you were doing that?
well, I think I must have, because I did hide some of the books, I wouldn't have them out in the open necessarily.
know.
So I think I must have known on some level that the things I was reading would not be approved.
Right.
Um, but it was also, there was so much fear. It just ingrained in my day-to-day existence, fear of punishment. Um, we would have these ritual punishments at the end of every day. And you often would be, punished and not really understand what you were being punished for. And it was very shaming and very, just really, really awful psychologically. I don't really want to get into the details, but it was
Sure.
pretty brutal.
Uh,
Um, so there was that. I was dealing with that almost every day. I was in, um, at least the fear of it, if not the actuality of it.
uh,
And then when I was probably 10, just to really kind of bring home this message of fear-based control, there was a film that we would watch, that was just absolutely terrifying. It was about the end times and the apocalypse, and they would make us watch it at school as children. And so I saw it for the first time when I was probably 10. And then by the time I was 11 or 12, I'd seen it maybe 2 or 3 times. And at the same time, I was being sort of brought into this system of purity culture within the group, which is, where essentially girls are being told at a very young age that they are responsible for men and boys' thoughts. So if a man or a boy has a thought about you that is sexual, it's your fault. But you're not told anything about sex. You're not told anything about your body. So, there's this extra layer of fear that you're somehow going to cause a boy or a man to have a thought about you.
Oh, wow.
And so it was just so much fear all the time. And just probably the third time that I was shown this film, I was maybe 11 or 12 years old. And I remember thinking that this is wrong. It's just wrong. You can't, it's wrong to control people by making them afraid. But of course, I was still in the system and I had no way out of it. So I had to just sort of be quiet with this cognitive dissonance that I had. Um, and that worked for a little while. But eventually, it was very hard for me to continue to be in line with this belief system when I knew that it was wrong, and I knew that what was happening to me was abuse.
By
So yeah, it started.
And by this time, your father is not really there. If he's there, he's physically abusive, maybe. Um, your mother is probably not wanting you to have these thoughts of doubt or that they're wrong. Where are your sisters at this point?
So my middle sister is she has some physical symptoms and a slight learning disability, but she's 5 years younger than me, and she has very little memory of any of it now as an adult. So I think that for her, she was experiencing some abuse as well. Um, Physical abuse and sexual abuse. And my youngest sister was really sort of not able to kind of be cognizant of what was happening in any meaningful way. She's a functional adult, but she's cognitively delayed, and
Mm.
probably I'd say maybe around the emotional level of maybe 13.
Mm. And so I only asked really to understand the level of loneliness you must have gone through at this point. It's very critical stage of life where usually an adolescent needs a model to look up to and to know how to enter the world of adults. So where does that leave you? Terribly, terribly lonely place, I imagine.
It's strange because I think that I felt safe in my isolation.
Mm, interesting.
So, I mean, what we know about isolation is that ultimately it causes stress on your nervous system. But I was already under so much stress on my nervous system that it relatively felt safer to be alone.
All right. Mhm. So maybe that's a notion for our viewers to think about, that sometimes being alone. What is the saying? Even the saying goes, better alone than in bad company, or something like that. No, that there is something along those lines. So obviously that's very true. Yes.
Yeah. But strangely, I did have some friendships, at this time of adolescence, with well, really, there was just one, close friendship with someone who was a year older than me, um, and we really sort of, we were trauma bonded, but we really did kind of, match up in terms of knowing that this that was wrong and that, we were not in a good situation and kind of being able to talk about that a little bit. But strangely, all these years later, I've been able to come out of the group and she has not left the group.
Wow.
So, it's just very, very arbitrary, I think, as to how people are able to come to these awakenings of what's actually happening to them and to actually have the resources to be able to leave.
When does your life begin to lift and out of this environment?
So I started experiencing some more serious abuse at the school when I was 13, and my mom worked there. So she knew that it was happening. We never talked about it, but I started to get pretty non functional, where I couldn't get out of bed. And it was a difficult time, and I think that at the end of it, I was begging, them to let me to go to a different school, to go to a public school, and, I finally was allowed to leave the school when I was, starting 10th grade. I was, 15 years old.
Right.
So I went from this, very, very structured, very isolated environment to the public school at 15, and that was a whole, a completely different experience with culture shock and everything else. So I don't think that mentally I was prepared to really deal with everything that had happened. At that point, I finished high school and somehow got myself into a university and started university. And that's when things really opened up for me to be able to kind of have, access to things that I hadn't known before and learning things that I hadn't known existed in the world and just seeing people who had all had normal lives.
Mm. Is grief a part of the process of leaving a cult, or because indeed being alone is so relieving, it's just relief? What how should we think about your liberation, let's say, from this group?
So I think in general, yes, there is always grief for people who leave a cult, whether it is because they're being shunned by the group, so they've left people behind, or it is because they realize, what the belief system that they were in, and they feel a lot of shame and guilt about that, and that, also causes grief. Or, it's for the lost time and the things that they missed when they were in the group. So, yes, there's always grief involved in leaving. It's one of the main reasons why people don't leave, I think, in a lot of cases.
To not
Um, yeah, yeah. So for me, it's so much more kind of global than that because it's so much more about who could I have been and what could my life have been if I had not been there for the first 18 years of my life.
um, okay. And where are you right now with this process, Tammy? Well,
So recovery from this type of complex trauma, which is, developmental and attachment trauma essentially for me, and it is for adults, who join cults as well, but just in a different way. Um it's a lifelong recovery process. And it's very difficult, but it is so incredibly worth it to do this work because it really does kind of bring you back to, yourself and who you are now. You don't get to have an identity as someone who grows up in a cult. That is literally stripped from you. You have no identity other than what they tell you you are. You're essentially, seeing yourself in every person that you interact with. That's your identity. So it's been a process of rebuilding from the ground up, and it's not an easy thing to do, but it's incredibly worthwhile.
Mm. Is there a connection to your body in that process? That because, as you said at the very beginning, they're so deconstructive of who you are or whatever you bring to the cult that is not part of their belief system, and they're also so manipulative and so constructive of a particular way of functioning. So I guess your relationship to your own body self, and to make it more simple for people to understand, for example, the joy of a little child, right? The natural joy that every child naturally feels usually, right? That is cut off. So that is something that you need to dissociate from. The sexual drive of an adolescent, that you're cut off as well, right? So I guess a lot of bodily processes get cut off your sense of being in the world, and so I would imagine that there needs to be a lot of work of recuperating that relationship to the body. And
Yes, yeah, so much of this work is around somatic processing. Um, and in fact, I just wanna point this out for anyone who's working therapeutically with somebody who has this type of trauma, that, a lot of times people want to move it right into, CBT techniques, for instance, to try and help a survivor. But until they are able to get to a state of regulation where they're not constantly dissociating, it won't work. CBT and other therapies of that nature are not going to work. So it's in the beginning so much more about regulation of the nervous system and, somatic processing, and then being able to kind of work through rebuilding your narrative under this lens of cultic manipulation and coercive control.
yeah, because if I understand well, all cults focus their energy on the future. They're very, very future oriented, right? This future needs to be achieved, or this future needs to be avoided. But essentially, your mind gets tracked into an imagined future that you come to believe is real, and so all your bodily processes and your identity formation is around that future. So the body can only be taken in the present, right? You can only have a positive relationship to your body when you are quite present. Those two things kind of going hand in hand. So I would imagine that with people that you work with, survivors of cults, that oftentimes it's about coming back to the present and what they see, and how they can orient themselves with their senses in the present.
Yes, that's a big part of it, just, giving a survivor tools for sort of mindfulness and orientation in the present is very important, because in most cults, what you experience is either forced or learned dissociation, just as a matter of course, because either you're told that you're a spirit and that your body is not important, or you're told that that your thoughts are not your own, that your emotions are not your own, so that you need to disregard these things. So you're just constantly in this state of separating from your body and your feelings, and it's something that you have to relearn.
Your desires, your intellectual curiosity. Anybody who works into a cult that is seriously cultish enough is going to be asked to give up on all their inner world dynamics, and to just favor only the dynamic that centers on the leader, I guess, and centers on the leader's requests and beliefs and emotions. So this is dissociation. I'm thinking with you now. I'm wondering if dissociation is an absolute feature of every cult experience.
Yes, to some degree or another, because it makes the mechanisms of control easier to implement.
And talking about this mechanism of control, Tammie, I know that in an earlier sort of chat that we had, we were able to hone in and focus in onto the minute ways in which control happens in many cults.
So essentially it's everything that we've talked about, it's all of these elements that we've spoken about, but it's so much more about the way that it is packaged and then repeated back to you as an individual. So if you want to look at it as someone who's just entering, right, they still have, maybe they're an adult and they still have all of their faculties and critical thinking skills with them. So the first step is to prey on their, not necessarily vulnerability, because I don't think that idealism is a vulnerability, but they're giving you what you want, or they're what you think they're giving you what you want in some way. They're providing you with something that you want or need.
Like,
And that's the first, like connection or, support or a place to live or a belief system, just whatever it is.
or even prayers, I would imagine at the beginning. Narcissists are, we talk of love bombing.
Yes.
Is there a form of collective love bombing going on in the beginning?
Yes, always. There's if you look at the narcissistic control loop, and it starts with love bombing always, and then, you move into at some point devaluation and then the hoovering, and then the whole thing just starts all over. So that's definitely it. So it starts in this very positive place, and then it very quickly moves into, oh, but if you want to be here and you want to stay here, there are certain things that you have to give us, or certain things that you have to do. And it can be, your belief system. It could be that they're going to labor traffic you, and it doesn't start out with the really severe things. It starts out with small things, and it just grows and grows and grows because they know that the system works, and they can see it working. And so once they know they have you, they can lay the heavier things on top of you, and they know that you won't react to it. And it can be because you're afraid that you're going to get kicked out, because at that point you really feel as if you need to stay and be a part of this group because it becomes your identity. Or it can be that there is someone there that they're, going to threaten if you don't do as you're told, or it could be, and they're encouraging you to separate from everyone on the outside, from anyone who can essentially try to talk you out of it, right? So, they're isolating you. They're, very slowly chipping away at your view of reality. They're, slowly taking away your ability to think critically, until really, you're just a shell of who you were, and you're completely controllable.
What are the kind of cult experiences that modern society in 2025 we find easily? What is a warning that you would launch if you could shout to the whole USA collective, let's say today, and then to the world at large? What would that message be?
That's a very good question. I think anyone who is offering you some kind of easy answer to your problem, that should be a red flag, because we know there are no easy answers
Like
really.
what?
And
Let's be specific. What would be something that can be proposed as an easy answer?
well, as René was saying, it could be as, simple as, we're offering you this belief system that will allow you to have eternal life and to, an end to all your suffering.
Or,
And
for
it
example,
sounds
the easy answer of knowing who is the enemy and who is the good guy and who is the bad guy.
right.
As if we could change life in a typical what is it, Marvel's hero movie type of story kind of thing,
Right.
where we are so clear about who is good and who is bad. And indeed in life it's much harder to differentiate that, who is us, who is them, who is good, who is bad. um, Even within us it's difficult to know what is good and what is bad of us, right? So all that complexity, if there is somebody telling you that they can do away with all that complexity and make it so simple for you, then that's a red flag. That's what you're saying, yeah?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think also it's just, you know, if something looks too good to be true, if someone is coming up with this, beautiful package of everything that your heart desires, and usually it's someone you don't know well or someone who has recently become a part of your life who's offering you this thing,
Mm.
that flag. And it's the same way in narcissistic relationships.
Tell us more. We don't know.
Well, if you well, if you become involved with someone that you don't realize is a narcissist, it usually starts out the same way. There's a lot of love bombing on the front end. There's a lot of idealization of you as a person and, what you bring and what you offer, until you're hooked in, and then that's when the pain and abuse begins. And then, to be able to maintain this cycle, there has to be, a break somewhere in the abuse so that, you forget what's happening to you, and then the cycle can start again. So, if you're, at the very beginning of a relationship, if you're being idealized and cherished and treasured, in a way that is not appropriate for the early stages of a relationship, that's a huge red flag.
Mm.
If it may be confused with like a love at first sight thing, but I think that so many people are looking for that kind of connection that they're often willing to overlook these red flags.
Yeah, because what dominates today the idea of love, if it's romantic love, and we know that even biochemically there is a honeymoon phase where we are kind of bombarded internally with endorphins and dopamine and so on. So usually we go through a kind of a idealization of one another quite naturally whenever we meet another person, because we're very, very projective also. Of course, that's where the idealization comes in, is that we don't actually know the other person. That's why we can project onto them the ideas of a partner that we want, not who they are or what they want, right? So in a way, I'm thinking that even that mechanism of like control exists in all of us. I mean, I've used it. My girlfriends have used it with me, and everyone who has been in a romantic relationship has gone through a kind of an egocentric form of love initially, right, Tammie? Um, because initially love is simply a projection. It's the pain, and that projection is rooted usually in trauma. The more traumatized we are, the more projective and idealistic we are, because it's a way of dissociating from that bodily pain and and stay and stay in ideas, um, and stay in ideas about the world and about ourselves that allows to continue living on, to hope, and right. So often we become very perfectionist or idealistic about the world because we suffer inside very strongly. Then we project that onto somebody that we meet, that we have just met, and the praise and rewards that that person gets um, initially is very alluring. I know that there is. I remember mentioning in an earlier chat that we had a client that I've met recently, and this this young girl had lost her father, I think, about 3 to 6 months in after she was born. The father didn't die. He just left well, actually, no. The mother went to live with the father in the family house of the father with the father's mother. So with the grandmother and a sister of the father, and then the mother of my client, so the wife of the father. Yeah. So basically, the mother of my client meets this man. They start to live in the house with the grandma and the sister, and then they have a child. And 3 months later, the mother decides to leave this some, and a court case starts, and this court case will go on for 13 years. A court case that will have to do with custody. Who can have the custody of this child. And during this period of 13 years, my client will see her father 3 hours a month under social security supervision. So always in the presence of a social worker. So anyway, long story short, this client is around their 30s now, and they have very, very strong insecurities about themselves. They don't know who they are, and they can't really find love in the world because they 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 know that what they've been brought up with, the idea that they've been brought up with about themselves, stands on a lie, like on something that has been untold this whole time. And when you look more carefully at this story, it's difficult to put the pieces together, basically. And she knows that she can't put the pieces together, really. Why would this father be a good man, and then she can only meet him 3 hours a month under social security supervision? And yet she has never asked these questions. We're only starting to ask this question right now. Anyway, the interesting thing is that just a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, she met a man who was something like 15 years older than her, 15, 16 years older than her. And this man, though, looked much younger. She thought it was more or less the same age as her. And but presented very wisely, right? Presented as someone who could guide her and so on. So she fell for this man. And then, of course, it ends up that this man is very manipulative and controlling, and then perhaps sort of suffers from some form of narcissistic traits. But when I met her last time, she said something along the lines of, I don't know if it was good or bad, because initially the gains were very high. I was migrating to a new country. I didn't know the language. I didn't have a job. And here there was this man who was giving me all these tips and knowledge about the place and what to do and what not to do. Like it was advantages to my situation. And then the second thing that I remember about this last session is that she says she's still attached to this man, even though they have separated. She still strongly thinks about this man. Is that she says, I realized that for the first time, I was able to interact with a man that I could educate and make good of. And so in a way, there is this big hole in this person because of the absence of the father. And here is a person that allows her to step into that relationship, that father-child relationship. And she's so clear about it. She's so clear about the fact that she's a daughter wanting to educate her father to be a good father for her. So these are incredible projections. She's here telling me this, but still emotionally, it's so clear to both of us that nothing is going to change. Like, she's in this place, and for now, she cannot get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. It reminds me of, unfortunately, when people are exposed to cultic manipulation or narcissistic abuse at a young age, it sort of grooms them for that that relationship again. And so very often this is why we see people who just go from one narcissistic abuse relationship to another, or we see people who it's called cult hopping, where they'll, leave one cult and then join another one. And the reason that that continues to happen is because there is no clarity at all. And until someone is able to really, really look at those experiences under a different lens and really reframe those experiences in a new way, it would just continue to happen.
Mm. And so are often experiences of narcissism in childhood sort of um, priming us to be attracted to these cult propositions, to these idealistic. But you think so? Yeah.
Yes.
And what does narcissism look like from a child point of view in a family? What does a narcissistic parent or narcissistic family system structure look like?
Well, in the extreme, it's situations where a child is literally held hostage by a parent or in a family. Up until adult years, this can happen. Uh, in a more normal sense, we're talking about, parents who believe that their children are extensions of them, and, their children are groomed to, be the perfect child so that the parent can receive, the validation that they need.
Mm.
And again, it's at the, it's at the detriment of the child's development and the child being able to form their own identity.
Mm-hmm. So there is a codependence there that wants to be created between the narcissistic parent and the child. Hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
Hmm. Yeah. From my point of view, in my own experience, the parent appears very projective indeed, just like I was mentioning before. And then if the love that they give to the child is very conditional.
Yes.
And that's maybe something that resonates with some of the things we've been telling about the cult, where you can only belong to the cult if you do, very particular things for them. Um, Parenthesis. I was thinking before, if if you had thought rationally about what was going on with the cult that you were in, I was thinking, that's a very, very small paradise. Like if, like what, maybe 15 people could have gotten into that paradise, or 20, so that would have been quite a small heaven, to get into. So, but that metaphorically, that shows how narrow the field of love is, right?
Right. Yeah, no, no, you're absolutely right. Every relationship that I had as a child was based on conditional love, including with the god of the cult. The god of the cult only gave his love conditionally. It was only under very certain circumstances that you would feel the love of God. Um, so yes, yeah, and obviously same thing in narcissistic family structures. Everything is conditional.
Right, right. If there is anything unconditional, that's maybe fear.
Right.
Unconditional fear. Every reason is a good reason to make you feel fearful.
Mm,
So, um, and with a narcissistic parent, I think there are two stages in the development of a child that are particularly threatening to the narcissist. One is when the child gets to the age of 5 or 6, when their ego has more or less formed. They begin to understand I am, or in my case, I am Nicolas, and you begin to understand you are Tammie, right? I am René. Um, I am black. I'm white. I have curly hair. I'm a boy, I'm a girl, I'm 6, I'm not 4, I'm not 8, all these sort of small differentiation. And so there is an ego there that begins to differentiate quite naturally.
Yes.
And then the second place is where that differentiation really takes a leap because of the sexual drive coming in. And that's in adolescence, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so what you often see is that parents will prescribe those things to their 5-year-old child, right? No, you like this. You don't, if you start to assert yourself and your identity and say, oh, my favorite color is green, the parent will say, no, your favorite color is blue. So your reality is getting twisted while your identity is also being taken away from you.
Right. Yeah. And in the case of a narcissist parent that I can think of, um, usually that comes with a certain level again of shaming, that if you don't correspond to the idea that there is either fear or shame to be felt on an immediate basis, and that can feel really threatening to a child because a child is still extremely dependent at the age of 5 and 6, um, up until
Right.
up until much later on, 17, 18.
Yes. Yeah.
So
So you just internalize that shame essentially. That is what you would need to recover from essentially if you've been involved in that type of experience as a child,
right,
because you don't even realize it's there.
right, yeah, yeah. Okay, René, we haven't heard from you for a little while. Are there any questions that?
I think from what you've shared, even with your client, I find it very curious how the small different qualities of Paul and what I got to share really ties it with so many different individuals across cultures and across the world, whereby whether it's the dependency of it, and whether it's the shame, the fear, the belief that, I'm worth of something and you should allow me have this privilege and not you. It really cuts across our different cultures. And as she also, I think that I really like the question you asked of like, what is one thing that you really have to look out for and tell people to look out for to our audience when it comes to joining cults. And she said, when someone brings in a whole kind of answer to something, a general answer to everything, I have the general answer. So, and I think maybe even to double down on the kind of personalities who feel that they can have this answer. What does it say, and how do these kind of personalities come up? Because even as I was looking into Paul, from being a taxi driver, I don't know how his own upbringing was, but how does it get to a point where someone feels that they have this answer that can change everyone, or they feel that they can deceive everyone and almost deceive themselves, if that actually is an experience they have?
Gosh, that's such a good question. Again, I think that it involves a certain level of narcissism and maybe even, kind of a grandiose personality.
Mm.
Um, but but I think it really is just this sense of at the beginning they're testing the waters to see what they can
Yeah.
get away with.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't always start out as this big, huge, giant thing. It starts out with, 1 or 2 people,
Yes.
usually. Um, and it's just a matter of really kind of fine-tuning those messages and those, tactics to be able to achieve what they want to achieve.
Yes, I remember guru. So was somebody who became a guru. He was actually half Jamaican, half English. So he grew up half in Jamaica and then he migrated to England because their parents were Jamaican English. And then he went through a few crises and so on. And I think he lost a daughter or a son. Yeah, he lost a son. And he was in deep grief and he went to India and he went and sort of met some gurus and so on. And then he came back from this trip, um, basically, according to him, enlightened, but he wouldn't put it in this way. Like he wouldn't say, I'm enlightened, but it's something extraordinary had happened. And he comes back to England and he starts to sell incense on the streets. Just and to the people that buy incense, he gives these little messages. And he writes these little messages at home, and they're kind of non-duality little messages, right? And so then people come back to him and say, okay, what does this mean? And he starts to talk about non-duality and educate about non-duality. Um, and then more and more people come, and so he ends up organizing, well, the people as well end up organizing some, let's say, tea parties where there is him and 10 other people, right? Or maybe 5 other people. And so a little following starts, and then 10 other people, and for years it's just 10 people. It's maybe different 10 people, but for 2-3 years it's just 10, 15, 20 people. And 15 years later, this man becomes a cult leader, the guru of a cult. um, and now all the stories out there, and of course the obvious abuses have been revealed and so on. So the cult is in its way out, and it's in its implosion phase. But it's so important, I think, that we underline, and I keep forgetting it myself, so important that we underline the fact that it's a slow process, that it doesn't start with big booms and bangs about you becoming a member of a cult. It starts very small with grooming, and maybe you just met this person casually, and maybe you meet them twice casually, and then they start to, oh, well, the universe wants us to meet, something like that. And so um, we need to be careful also at our tendencies to find easy answers in the world. Maybe one thing that I would shout to everybody out there to warn them about cults is stay curious about the complexity of the world. All right. If there is maybe something that can protect people from entering, is the world is complex. Live by that, and live by your ability to face that complexity. Right.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a son he's 17, and it's something that I tell him all the time, is that number one, there are people who want to manipulate you in every realm of society. Maybe it's not a cult, maybe it's just a narcissist, but there are people who wish to manipulate others, and they're out there, and the best thing you can do is to be a critical thinker, use your critical thinking skills, question things. If something, especially be aware of how things feel in your body, and this is why it's so easy to fall into another cult or narcissistic situation if you've already been in one, because you're already not aware of what's happening in your body, right? So, if you don't have instincts that you can trust, it's much easier to get pulled into something else. But for my son, who's never experienced cultic manipulation or narcissistic abuse, he has instincts that he trusts, and so many people do, and that is such a big part of being aware of what's happening. So it's funny. So I'll point things out to him often. If we see a sign for a political group that looks a little bit off, I'll say, let's look that up when we get home and see what it is. And, just things like that, just to really kind of be aware of what's out there. And as you say, appreciate that the world is a complex place, and that there really are not any simple answers.
No. Yeah. René, what do you take away from this um, beautiful almost 2 hours time that Tammie has given us?
I think it helps me, and I think it helps also most of the viewers to extend some compassion for those who might have someone who's still in that in those communities, whether Tammie, whether even like your clients that you're trying to deal with, and even the people I've had who are still trying to get this person free. I'm extending compassion and understanding how they got themselves in that point, their experience, maybe their worldview of seeking and the need of to seek paradise. That I think is not a bad thing. What I'm understanding is that their need, and even as we're going to share this story, there's nothing inherently wrong to with these motivators to want a community that makes you feel belong, that makes you feel that there's a reward or something like that. The needs are not bad, but just how it's done and how it's exploited is what is poisonous. And I think getting to understand that how we go about these wants and needs that maybe are human really need some time, really need a one that can't have a one quick solution, whether it's with one person who brings themselves as a messiah of some sort or a leader of some sort. Understanding that it's much more complex that as it can involve a whole team and maybe a couple of people that, yeah, can really come together, including ourselves, can come together and help our existence much better. So for me, I really get to live with compassion. I hope even our viewers get to pick up on that compassion and understand that what we experience and the patience we need to have when we want something to change in our world is something very important and can save us a lot of abuse.
So compassion and patience is that what I'm hearing from you, René? What do you think, Tammie, of the suggestion?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. What I always tell people who have a family member or loved one who is in a cultic group is that unfortunately you won't be able to talk them out of it. That because usually they're just already too far gone, and anything you say is really just going to draw more of a wedge. But what you can do is just keep those compassionate lines of communication open so that when they do eventually start to wake up or have doubts, that they have somewhere to go. They have a support system because so often people don't leave because they don't have anywhere to go because they've had to cut themselves off from everything. They don't have money to support themselves. They won't have a job or a place to live. So keeping those lines of communication open can be the difference between somebody leaving or just staying even though they know what they're in. So absolutely, yes. And also just really what you're saying, Renee, is so true. Um, anyone can get caught up in a cultic system. It could happen to anyone at any time. It's really, it's not, it doesn't make you stupid. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human.
Yes, yes. As we have seen, more or less, there are many basic psychological mechanisms within us that prepare us, that prime us for these experiences. So those who are skilled in tapping into these mechanisms end up appropriating themselves of part of our lives, part of our intelligence potential, and so on. And so we need to be vigilant. Yeah, as I was listening to René, I was thinking I would love to extend that message also to the realm of love, that you want to, whoever you meet and you fall in love with, that I think you would want to, you know, be somewhat a little critical as much as you can, to engage a little bit cognitively and not think that this person is gonna bring you all the idealized solutions that you think you can get from the world. You're probably gonna be wrong about what this person is gonna bring to your life. So give that give that wrong a voice, even in the early stages of your love relationship, and because that extends to an individual as much as it can extend to a group, right? So that's the reason why I'm saying what I'm saying. Maybe there is something we need to rectify in the vision of love that we have, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think about how often people when they leave a relationship are able to then look back and see the red flags that they
Right.
that they just completely ignored and blew past because they were in this, honeymoon phase, as you say.
Yeah.
Um, it's the lesson there, I think, that is so hard. But if we can learn that lesson that we really have to trust ourselves and pay attention to those red flags. It's a way to really protect yourself.
Mm. Okay, fantastic. I can't ask you for more, Tammie. You've been extremely generous with your time, with your smile, with your soul, really. Thank you very, very, very much. Before we conclude this interview, we want to give you a chance to let everybody know how they can reach you, uh, what you might encourage people to reach you for, and so on.
Okay. So I work in a community of survivors of complex trauma. These are adults who have experienced cultic abuse and manipulation, narcissistic family structures, what is called the troubled teen industry here in the U.S. Any type of coercion or narcissistic control. And I offer resources for recovery, or for educational purposes. I offer one-on-one consultation, and we have a structure of support groups for different populations of survivors as well. So if you're at all interested in recovery from any of the things I mentioned, you can reach out to me at my email address, which is reachoutandresource@gmail.com.
Mm. What are these different populations of survivors? Is it distinguished by age or by the intensity of the experience?
Well, it's sort of differentiated by experience. So we have a few groups that are specifically for people who were born and raised in their situations or who experienced narcissistic family structures from a young age. We have groups for people in the LGBTQIA plus community because their experience within cultic systems is very, very different.
Mm.
Uh, we have groups for people who joined cults as adults. And then we also have a book and media discussion group that is for anyone who is a survivor. We're currently reading a book called Conquering Shame and Codependency, which is a big, big issue with survivors of narcissistic abuse.
Are there other books that would be very highly recommended for anyone either coming out of a cult or wanting to almost know better how not to fall into a cult? Anyone interested?
I would say one of the best books, I think honestly, the best information about cults is to hear firsthand accounts or read firsthand accounts. There are a few podcasts that interview cult survivors. One is called Indoctrination. Another is called A Little Bit Culty. And there are a few cult survivor books that I highly recommend as well. Um, there's there's a story of a woman who grew up in a narcissistic family structure that is called Believing Me, and the book is by Ingrid Clayton. It's a really great illustration of what this kind of complex trauma looks like in a person who's born and raised in it.
Great.
Um, and and then I can certainly provide more resources if anyone is interested.
If they reach out to you. And what do these groups look like? Why groups? And what are the dynamics there? And I'm thinking um, if anybody is going to be, worried that maybe you have started your own cult, how would you convince them that you haven't?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. Okay, so the way that the group dynamic is formed is it's a peer support situation. So there's really no leader or expert. It's really just peer to peer support. The groups,
Everyone is free to communicate with everyone on any
yes,
topic at any time at any depth, right? The
yes, yeah.
opposite of what we have been told with.
Yeah, nothing is really off the table, they're very, very cultivated safe spaces. In order to gain access to the group, there's a short interview that happens on the front end with me,
Uh-huh.
um, just so that I can make sure that people are, on the up and up and in a place to be able to kind of receive this type of recovery information because it can be very triggering. So the groups are an incredibly safe and validating space for people to practice relational healing, which is so important in recovery from cultic manipulation.
Great, great. And so the group, what is the element? So the group has this relational healing, and what else do you think is particularly advantageous to work in? I guess the mutual recognition that certain things are very normal to the experience. It helps normalizing things a lot.
Essentially, it's an opportunity for people to, number one, practice relational healing, and number two, get the validation that they need for their experiences. Because you often feel as if you're losing your mind, because you're living in this place of constant trauma response. You don't understand why you do the things you do. It's very hard to separate who you are as a person from your trauma responses. So it's a pretty acute state to live in, and
Mm,
being in a situation with other survivors is a way to co-regulate, and it's a way for people to see themselves in others' experiences, which really kind of expands your understanding of what happened to you.
Today we mostly talked about religious cults, but I believe there are any numerous set of topics that can become cultic. I guess that podcast a little bit culty probably touches very much on that sort of uh, understanding, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Cults are everywhere. We have survivors that have come from all kinds of, there are Eastern yoga cults. There are things like Scientology, there are religious cults. There are, therapy
Go cults.
even, political cults. There are several kind of therapeutic cults out there, as well. Online cults. There are just so many opportunities for people to be manipulated.
Mm, yes. And I came across, as we were preparing for this interview, I came across some really nice interviews about cults on I think it's called Big Thing. Maybe you know this channel. So we'll link those resources in the description as well. Okay, Tammie, I still have I can see my stomach is still bubbling with curiosity and questions. So we'll see how we'll manage to answer those in the future. But for now, thank you very, very much for coming on.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I really enjoy speaking with both of you. We're right there. Your questions are so amazing, and the conversation has just been great. So thank you so much.
That's a big compliment. Thank you very much. René,
Thank you so much again, Tammie, for actually just coming on and just sharing so much insight about these communities, about this experience that many people go through. And hopefully, our viewers will get some time after this long discussion to figure out how they've been part of such maybe structures that they didn't know up until they go to share some insight. And I hope they are actually are able to share and get this revelation for themselves. So thank you, Tammie, again.
Absolutely.
wonderful. Thank you, viewers. This was a long interview, but we hope it was educative somehow. And we'll see you around for the next guest. And thank you, Tammie, again, and all the best. for the future. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.